And here's a clip from Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous speech, "I Have a Dream."
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
The March on Washington was a large rally in the support of civil and economic rights for African Americans. It took place in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, August 28, 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his historic speech, "I Have a Dream," advocating racial harmony at the Lincoln Memorial during the march. The march was organized by a group of civil rights, labor, and religious organizations, under the theme Jobs and Freedom. The estimated number of people that participated in the rally varies from 200,000 police officers and over 300,000 leaders in the march. Approximately 75 to 80% of the marchers were black, and the rest were white and other minorities. In the political sense, the march was organized by a coalition of organizations and their leaders, including Randolph, who was chosen as the so-called head of the march, James Farmer, who was the president of the Congress of Racial Equality, John Lewis, who was the president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Martin Luther King Jr., who was the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Roy Wilkins, who was the president of the NAACP, and Whitney Young, who was the president of the National Urban League. In addition, the march is known for its help in passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Montgomery bus boycott was a campaign that started in 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama. It was intended to oppose the city's policy of racial segregation on its public transit system. Many important figures were involved in the boycott, including Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy. The campaign began on December 1, 1955, when Rosa Parks, an African-American woman, was arrested for refusing to surrender her seat to a white person. The controversy ended on December 20, 1956, when a federal ruling took effect and led to a United States Supreme Court decision that declared the Alabama and Montgomery laws requiring segregated buses to be unconstitutional. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was one of the principal organizations of the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. It emerged from a series of student meetings led by Ella Baker, held at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina in April 1960. SNCC grew into a large organization with many supporters, and it played a major role in the sit-ins and freedom rides, and a leading role in the 1960 March on Washington. The SNCC, also known as SNCC, was dedicated to overturning segregation in the South and giving young blacks a stronger voice in the civil rights movement. It organized and used the nonviolent tactic of protest called sit-ins, in which the first 4 young black men sat at a segregated, whites-only lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. Although the protesters did not show their aggression or use violence, they still had a huge impact. And when others heard what they had done, there was a new wave of sit-ins all throughout the South that were led by Ella Baker and Stokely Carmichael. When the rumors of the lunch counter sit-ins in North Carolina started to spread, Martin Luther King Jr. decided that he would join the movement. While participating in a sit-in at an Atlanta restaurant, he was arrested and sentenced to 4 months in jail. Only after an intervention by John Robert Kennedy was he released from jail. On Good Friday, April 12th, King is arrested with Ralph Abernathy for demonstrating without a permit. On April 13th, the Birmingham campaign is launched, and this would prove to be the turning point in the war to end segregation in the South. During the 11 days he spent in jail, Martin Luther King Jr. writes his famous letter from Birmingham jail. On May 10th, the Birmingham Agreement was announced. The stores, restaurants, and schools would all be desegregated, the hirings of blacks would be implemented, and the charges would be dropped. On June 23rd, Martin Luther King Jr. leads over 125,000 people on a freedom walk in Detroit, and by the next year he appeared on the cover of Time magazine as its Man of the Year. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in Memphis, Tennessee by James Earl Ray. Immediately, riots broke out all over the U.S. Later in the year after his death, the Civil Rights Act of 1968 was passed and outlawed housing discrimination.